welcome to Property Quorum. Once again, we rejoin the happy throng to do battle, or is it discussion about everything that's good and bad and in between in property. As usual, we have Juliet Baboolal of gunnercooke, Hamish McLay of Search Convey, Chris Gilsenan of Root Home, and our very, very special guest this week, of course, is Michelle Carr, guardian angel of construction. And today's topic is, as usual, an interesting one. Will I suddenly have to pay 300% on my council tax suddenly out of the blue? And of course, as usual, I'm throwing Hamish straight under the bus.
Well, in fairness, it wasn't me that thought on this subject. I thought Mr. Gilsenan was responsible for this.
Oh, it's his fault.
In addition to this, is it an inconsistency? I'm not so sure. I mean, I have a summer house at the bottom of my garden, and some poor soul has sort of something very similar. It sort of almost sort of looks a little bit like a mini pavilion. I mean, you don't get the picture here at some stage or another. And one of the council decided that although this particular place wasn't fit to live in, nobody could live in it. There was no running water, there were no loos or anything. But because somebody used it as a sort of overload for the house, they'd got, when their friends and family came, they could put them up in the summer house. And the council decided for some reason or other, although they couldn't sell it or use it or live in it or all these things, they could charge 300% council tax on it. Now that got me worried, because I've got a summer house, as I said, there's this inconsistency. When's a house not a house? Is a summer house a house? This sort of, I don't know, but it's not just that that's inconsistent. We have inconsistencies in so many different sort of things. We have regulations which aren't regulations. We have fire risks which aren't fire risks. We have, now how the heck does anybody that's trying to look into this and sort of plan it, like the other soul who joined us today, the knowledgeable ones in the quorum? I mean, I sit here in amazement. How the heck do you figure it all out? So I think we better pass on to somebody who's got knowledge about these things. They can perhaps tell us a way around it, and maybe not fall into the trap of thinking, oh, that looks a nice little property, I'll buy that, and ending up paying 400% on your council tax if you add in your own as well. That's quite a chunk. I mean, that's our area. It's about $8,000 worth.
That's nuts. Absolutely nuts. I'm actually going to. I've managed to get it up on a screen somewhere. Let's have a look. It's that. It's absolutely nuts. And what I'll do is afterwards, we'll put. In fact, Chris, I think you sent us the link. I'll put that in the chat afterwards. All right. So let's get back on track. Juliet, thoughts? When's a house not a house?
So, again, yes, there's inconsistency, but again, the people that are looking into this, the people that work at the local authorities, are themselves not informed enough to to give out the information that's needed. So I think it goes back to what we always sort of drum on about, having the right professionals and getting the right advice. And even if when you were purchasing something like that, you got the right advice in terms of what your potential council tax is going to be, you've got to do your research. You've got to take that with a pinch of salt. I mean, I'll give you an example, and it's not so much inconsistency, but it's how quickly the information changes. So the land registry, they're changing their prices. So, for example, you'd get an office copy now. I can download that. So the deeds to someone's house, I can download that for £3. In December, that's going to change to £7. So I may say to someone, these are your costs, these are your potential costs, based on what the fees are now. But if that rolled into December, which is very plausible on a property transaction, the fees are going to double. And is that really an inconsistency, or is that me failing to inform the client or notify them of that change should the transaction run into December. So I do think you yourself as a consumer need to be vigilant enough to go on to the local authority's website, do a lot of reading in terms of, the property that you're buying in the area. Back in the day, we couldn't tell if a road abounding a property was adopted. You can now. There are maps on there. There's so many different tools available to you, so that if you know that your council tax is going to be 300%, the reality is you are fully aware of what you're getting yourself into, so that it doesn't hit you as a surprise when you do complete that purchase and you get that council tax invoice, and you've budgeted for it. So I think it's a mixture of having the right professional on hand to give you insight in terms of what might be happening and what costs you might be exposed to, but you also doing your research, going onto the local authority's website. There's usually a frequently asked questions section, and read all of that, bedtime reading, whatever it is, read all of that with a fine-tooth comb, so you're fully equipped when you complete that purchase. You're fully equipped with knowledge in terms of what exposure you might have.
All right, I'll take that. Chris, surely, if this thing was bought in the 1950s and people have lived in it on and off and done things in it, and suddenly they want to pull the rug from under their feet, this can't be fair, can it?
Stories like this really grab my attention and they tickle me initially, but it's just such an obvious cash grab. and these guys, they behave like gangsters. They honestly do. They use the law to their own advantage. They write these rules and regulations that allow them to govern and dictate what can happen. And there's almost no rebuttal. I mean, the fact that they're trying to double a council tax or class someone's shed at the bottom of their garden as an additional dwelling that should also have to pay council tax on, it's just ridiculous. And it's infuriating seeing these types of scenarios. Exactly the same with what Juliet's talking about in the land registry doubling their prices. Why? They're meant to have digitized everything. Digitizing everything is meant to reduce the costs. If it's stored on a computer system somewhere, why is it now double the price to click the same button to retrieve the same document? Please tell me.
They have to charge you per byte. I think that's what it is.
The same amount of bytes, though, Gareth.
I don't know. I'm always up for a nibble. Michelle, this can't be right, can it? I mean, I'm going to repeat to you. When's a house not a house?
So I think there's a number of things here. I agree with what everyone's saying. Firstly, the council are unlikely to have found out about this particular property, and the same with your neighbour Hamish, unless a resident has grassed them up. So basically, a resident has raised it, because the council don't go around and check these things. The way that they find out is a resident. So one, people need to stay in their lane and mind their business is the biggest point, because that is the majority of the problem. Because the council just don't check things. It's when somebody grasps them. And I know this because I've worked on a number of properties where people have not been happy about me doing the work there, nothing to do with me, to do with the client, or whatever it may be, whatever reason, whatever issues they have. And you end up having issues with the council because they're on the phone to the council 24/7 for every tiny little thing you do. And then there's other properties and other projects you can get away with it. So some of the inconsistencies are the fact that the things that you can get away with and you can't, or you get away with until you get caught. So yes, there are rules and the rules shouldn't change. But then on the other side of the coin, I think it's a lack of professionalism and education, experience, understanding, because ultimately, as far as I'm concerned, unless something's changed dramatically in the last few months, planning, in order to have planning and it to be a separate dwelling and for it to be habitable, it needs to have fresh running water, electric, and I don't know if it has to have electrics actually, but it definitely has to have water. So I don't understand how that can be a living abode. Potentially they could add it as an additional bedroom, and then charge a different council tax band from being a 4-bed to a 5-bed. Potentially, I think you could potentially have that. But I think there's also a distance, and that picture that you just showed there's far too much of a distance between the closest toilet or whatever for it to classify. So yeah, there's a number of things. Inconsistencies primarily are because people don't understand the rules and they bend them, and so nobody knows what the clear rules are unless they do their due diligence and read the rules, as Juliet said, or you've got people not fully understanding what the legislation is. and acting and thinking they're doing something good, and they're thinking they're getting someone and whatever. They have this attitude that they've caught someone out purely because they've manipulated or only read part of the rules and applied it to the case.
Wow. Hamish, it appears that we're part of another dobbing in culture.
Well, the snag is this inconsistency. And I mean, Juliet's sort of so right. What we've just spoken about land registry. Now, here's an intriguing one. What actually sort of happened for whatever reason, the Hertfordshire councils or somebody in their sales mode decided that they would sell, or they would go in and tell the Hertfordshire council people, hey, look, tell you what, we'll give you loads of money. We'll take over building control for 7 of your councils. Big number of councils actually in Hertfordshire. So they took over the building control for 7 of the councils. And initially they came up they changed the rules overnight, and they said, right, okay, what we'll do now, bearing in mind this is environmental information, we should be able to view the information. It should be in the public domain. And they turned and said, well, what we can do for you, you can come and look at the information, but it's after 4 o'clock in St Albans, for whatever part of Hertfordshire you want to get after 4 o'clock in St Albans. Or we can do it for you, but it'll cost you £40. You think, how many people want to be in St Albans after 4 o'clock? Now, okay, there was all of this stupidity, and it was argued, hey, look, should be in the pub. So they changed it all around. Now, all of a sudden, it became that, okay, each property would do it. It will be a cost, but it's independent. It's not the council that's charging you. It's Hertfordshire building control. So they charge us £1.50. Now, we didn't have the advance warning that Land Registry have given us. All of a sudden, at the beginning of November, Hertfordshire building control has been bought out by Hertfordshire Council, and they're going to charge us not £1.50, but £10.
Hang on a moment.
Information. First of all, how the hell could they afford to do it? Because all the councils are broke. But inconsistency. Okay, what the heck's £10 in the grand? But it is just the absurdity of the whole thing. What can you rely on actually sort of moving forward? There's all sorts of other things about councils, but that's another story. But to me, is that inconsistency. How can we actually guarantee it moving forward, particularly with a government that's about to introduce all sorts of other inconsistencies, I reckon, as we move along.
Chris, I don't know if you remember Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, when the Vogon constructor fleet were about to destroy Earth because it was in the way of a bypass. And they said, oh, yeah, but the plans have been on display for months in some weird, tiny little... Is that what's going on here? They're making it as hard as possible for us to see what's going on, then just tripling, quadrupling, or 10xing the prices in Hamish's case.
I agree. Like I said, I think it's just a cash grab, and it's they try and legitimize it with the rules that they put in place, and they write for their own benefit, and then they obscure things as well. So we obviously we do a lot of stuff in the HMO world and have to adhere to different local authority standards, and they vary wildly, not just in the context of what the information they do provide, but also in the information they don't provide. And it feels almost like it's intentionally vague to try and trip you up. So yeah, it's very challenging, and there's no rhyme or reason to actually double prices overnight or 10x prices overnight, yes, other than the obvious.
Juliet, what should the current government be doing to make this far less ridiculous?
Well, there needs to be checks and balances, and there needs to be accountability. So people can't be laws unto themselves. For example, if you're telling me my council tax is 3% and you're not able to justify it, it's basically based on your interpretation of legislation, and there's no checks and balances to that. Or there's one rule for me and another rule for another. I remember I had someone who was doing a development on a purpose-built student accommodation, and he wanted to increase the units or increase the bedrooms by putting a separator between one room to create two. And the question was that a development? And we'd gotten all sorts of advice from this barrister and that one and that one. And it just boiled down to, if the council is strapped for cash, they will find a way to charge you for it. And if that is what we're playing with, because there's no accountability, there's no ombudsman, there is no one that you can actually go to who's independent enough to look at a scenario and discern, this is not fair, this is not right, then we're not going anywhere, because people are just making up rules as we go along. And, you know, one thing applies to me and another applies to you. So that's where I think, you know, checks and balances and accountability, some level of accountability in terms of, you know, what the local authorities do, or you know, general institutions within the land registries world. For example, if you had a lender who was acting in this way, deciding to charge default interest or penalties, etc., they would be before the FCA so quickly, they would potentially lose their consumer credit license and they would be made an example of. So why are the local authorities immune to this?
Oh, is it cash-strapped authorities just hiking up the figures because they can, Michelle?
I'm not sure. I'm experienced enough to answer that, but it would make sense. I mean, I'm quite surprised what Hamish was saying about selling building control to councils. I mean, you can get a private building control person if you want to. There's many of them, and they're often easier to deal with on big developments anyway. I just find anything to do with the government just idiotic most of the time. It never makes any sense to me. The forms that one department never speaks to another, one form doesn't match another form, and you can go round and round in circles and no one ever seems to know what they're talking about. So possibly yes, no, I really don't know.
Hamish, please take us home.
I don't know there's any home to go to now, is there? I mean,
Well, certainly not unless you want to pay 300% rising council tax. No.
Well, I'll go and live in a summer house without any loo or running water. There's a couple of bottles of wine in here, mind. Okay, another story. I think this is the challenge, and I do believe it's accountability. And I think, in view of the fact, I mean, I've made mention of one particular point about building control. I mean, Hertford's not the only place that we have a challenge with building control. However, we do know that there's something wrong with building control, because somehow or other building control isn't controlling the quality of what goes into buildings. They're just passing it off as acceptable. And I do think that accountability is a big thing. And we really do need to put an element of control into that. And that needs seriously looking into, because at the moment, as Michelle just sort of suggested there, that you can get private building control. A lot of builders, as we know, the likes of Barrett and whoever, they nominate their own people who are responsible for the building control, sit them down, give them a cup of coffee, and away they go quite happy and say, yeah, everything's okay, because we've ticked the boxes. Did I say that? Yeah, okay. Whatever. This is what happens.
I didn't hear anything.
No accountability. We've got to have accountability.
Well, after another rip-roaring trial by words, this one today, I think there appears to be certain parts of society need to get their act together and put some accountability in place. Hush my mouth. Once again, I have to thank our stalwarts, Juliet, Baboolal, gunnercooke, Chris Gilsenan of Root Home, Hamish McLay of Search and Convey, and of course, Michelle Carr, the guardian angel of construction, a QS who is to be reckoned with. Can I please say that, guys, logic has to prevail somewhere. I beckon to anybody out there that's in a position of power to please have a look at this and stop the madness. There's only so much anarchy this poor brain can cope with. Can I say that everybody, please, there's good news coming. I don't know what it is. I'm just putting it out there. There's good news coming. Let's keep our feet on the ground, keep reaching for the stars, and please look after our mental health. And until next week, I wish you all a very happy and cheery weekend. Goodbye.